very first black righteous, like CIA kind of thing.
Ah, good. That's a good analogy. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
It was coded, and that's how we could do it. And you're right. If you watch espionage movies and things like that, they probably copied it off of the people. From American South formed the congregation of Sandwich First Baptist Church about 1840, calling itself the Close Communion of Baptists. It was three founding churches of the Amherstburg Baptist Association in 1840, a cross-border organization of black Baptists that is still active today. In 1847, until 1847, when they built a small log cabin, members of First Baptist worshipped in homes and outdoors. To build this church, they hewed lumber by hand, molded bricks from Detroit River clay, firing them in a homemade kiln. The church was dedicated on August 1st, 1851, the 18th anniversary of the passage of the Emancipation Act, which ended slavery throughout the British Empire.
That is some history.
That is some history.
And from what you read, they actually built this church by themselves.
By themselves.
Everything.
And the bricks, as some people say, the bricks. Now you can see the difference in the bricks here and the bricks here. You can see the actual difference.
That's right.
This was built after. This was built with the crown. And if you go back, you'll see it looks like a crown because it was giving homage to Queen Victoria. But this here, these are the bricks, and none of them are really what you would call the same. They there's everybody's soul. Those people, the souls of some of those people are right in those bricks. Yes.
Lana, we meet again.
We meet again.
I would like a little bit of history about this, the Sandwich First Baptist Church.
Okay. So, somewhere along the line in 1820, it could have been 1818, there were people, some were free blacks, some were escapees from the United States, but the majority of those people that I feel started the Sandwich First Baptist Church were people that were already here in the town of Sandwich. And I feel wholeheartedly that some of them were free, like I said, and they had the opportunity to practice church or have church in a log house. There weren't many people. I think there might have been 10 or 11, because outside there is a sign that said there were 11 fugitive slaves. So previous to those 11, I think there may have been 11 other people that were free blacks here in Sandwich. And they conducted church. Why they had to have church in a log cabin is because the white Baptists refused to let black Baptist people praise the Lord together or congregate together. And that's sort of a sadness because we're all supposed to be Christians. So anyways, as the enslaved people came from the United States, from, as they called it, midnight, they came across the Detroit River. Some came from Fort Wayne. There was an area in Fort Wayne, and there's what you would call a fort, but it was never occupied. It was only occupied. Now, someone wrote yesterday that it was occupied by the Irish man and wife that took care of you would call them like the janitor, that took care of the building. But my recollection was that they stayed right there in the fort and took care of the fort, helping the enslaved people that had escaped cross the Detroit River here in Sandwich. Now, a lot of people don't realize the city of Windsor did not become Windsor until the late 1800s, but some say the late 1700s, but there's always been an area called Sandwich Town. And as the enslaved people came across, they started worshiping at Sandwich Baptist Church. And in doing that, church started to grow, and it got too big for the little log cabin, so they built a larger, or they went to a larger, maybe a 2-bedroom log cabin, and in that log cabin they started having church. And as that they outgrew the church there, they went to Queen Victoria, and a pastor and 2 deacons, Isom Thompson, Henry Turner, and I believe the minister, his name was Henry Brandt. And what they did, he asked the Queen or her court to have a parcel of land here in Sandwich. And she gave them approximately half a hectare on the west side of Peter Street, which this edifice was built. And in building this church, we were able to, I believe, probably have close to maybe 50, 60 people. And as people learned about this being a safe haven, there was a man by the name of Henry Bibb who had a newspaper called Voice of the Fugitive. And the Voice of the Fugitive was a coded paper where they could say, here in Sandwich today, we received 12 chickens, 13 hens, but no roosters. And for those people that were down south that could read, and when they got that, they knew that the people had arrived safely, the cargo, as it was known on the Underground Railroad. Now, Henry Bibb had a refugee home society here in this church where those people that came from the south and had run, that he could have, they would find food, clothing, and a place for them to dwell. Now, somewhere along the line, Henry Bibb was the editor of that newspaper. He would be in Michigan, he would be in Pewes, he'd be in Amherstburg, he'd be in Toronto. He made a point to go all over to places where it was safe for the enslaved people to come. We understand anybody that knew this area knew that the enslaved people, once they found their freedom, or so-called freedom, in Canada, because we know freedom isn't free until every man is free, no matter his race, creed, or color. And when they found the bounty hunters coming around to take notice, everybody in the area that heard of or saw the bounty hunters, and you'd say, how would you know a bounty hunter from one way? Because they carried the little bat, they had the big hats, and they just didn't look like people, ordinary people that would live in the city. So what they did, they'd tie a ribbon around a stump, or they would start the ringing of a bell. Once the bell started ringing, the pastor here at this church would lock the doors. And once everyone that was escaped from the south was hidden underneath the floor, they would say, sing this song, there's a stranger at the door, let him in. The bounty hunter would come and look through the congregation, and everybody would say, how would you tell one black from another black? Well, I believe this, if you'd run in fear, little food to eat, run by night where you couldn't see if the moon wasn't night. If it was an overcast sky, you could never find your way. You might find your way back to the plantation. But people would always say, follow the North Star. Follow the North Star is what they would do. Feel the side of the tree that has the moss growing on. How true that is, I don't know. I didn't experience it. And I don't think anybody else did. So a lot of the knowledge or the information we get, it has to come from people that had experienced it.
Yes. For those that don't really know what their underground railroad is, some people might think it's an actual railroad. So could you please clarify?
Okay. The Underground Railroad was not a railroad with a train and the tracks that went underground. Underground means you really don't know what is underground. Well, underground was just a code. We had conductors. The conductors would be people at the station. Different stations would be places where the conductor could conduct the business of the Underground Railroad, telling them who they could trust, where they could go for food, where they would have to hide. And we are so grateful for the abolitionists. We have black abolitionists and white abolitionists. And some of those took their lives in their hand because at any time, the people, the Klan, or just people that had lost their packages, as they were called, human beings were called cargo or packages, once they escaped from a plantation. A lot of times the owner had children that were his children by an enslaved woman. And a lot of times some of those worked in the house. They were the ones that were able to learn to read and to write and to steal food and give it to the passengers that were on getting ready to make their journey. Now, a lot of times would let the black African women sew. And once they started sewing or singing, people knew what those codes meant. There's they call it the Underground Railroad quilt that has, I forget, 16, some has 16, some have 12 different motifs. There's one with the North Star, there's one with the drunkard, just showing the pathway, and the other would be the log cabin. One would be the geese flying north. Another would be, what else? There's so many different motifs in that quilt, but those were just some of them to let them know once they saw it either hanging on the line or hanging out of a window. That's a code, that's a time. It's time to leave the plantation. Now, all those things being connected, a lot of times they would steal away 3 o'clock in the morning because by 6, they are supposed to be up and working. It's just amazing how things, my theory, and it's my opinion, and everyone has one. My opinion, if it wasn't for God Almighty, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, how would you know to connect one thing to another? How would you know that? But they did. They connected 1, 2, 3. So this Underground Railroad was just an idea of how to find freedom, how to get away from this horrible, horrible thing of slavery, which killed people, which hung people, which tarred and feathered people. If you didn't do what they told you to do, cut off your foot if you were ever caught running, cut off a hand if you were caught stealing because you were hungry or you wanted to feed your child. Slavery is a horrible, deplorable thing. Horrible. And I don't care who you are. To enslave one is to take one's ability to be a human being and to think for yourself and to be the individual God created you to be. Because we're all individual. I am not one to follow people. I have my own way of thinking, and I will not be denied my thoughts. And people should start thinking that way. I'm not a follower of things, but I truly know that if you just stop and think, how did they get from one plantation to another plantation? Another thing I would love to let people know, sometimes when I watch TV or I watch a movie, I said, oh my God, that person looks just like somebody in my family. And I'll always say what they did with the women. They had babies by women. They took the black buck, as he was called, and took him from plantation to plantation making babies. So if you had a very strong-willed man that went from plantation to plantation to plantation, 9 times out of 10, those that ran came from that one buck because they had that strength, they had that ability to run because they no longer wanted to be held as a slave.
See, from my understanding, it seems like the Underground Railroad was like the very first black righteous, like CIA kind of thing.
Ah, good. That's a good analogy. It really is.
Yeah.
It was coded, and that's how we could do it. And you're right. If you watch espionage movies and things like that, they probably copied it off of the people. We know we are ingenuous because we do things because we do it because it's innate within us. We know how we have to do things in order to get where we want to go. And this is what they have always done. They've always taken our inventions and put their names on it. They've always done this. They've always discredited us and credited someone that had white skin. And that's so wrong. And I give respect to Levi Coffin, or Jonathan Cable, or the whole group of Quakers that would put their lives in their hands in order for us to be get to freedom. There were so many different things, like if a slave, an enslaved person, come to a house that they know was a safe house, and if the man is sweeping to the right, that means bounty hunters or someone there is looking for them. So keep right on going. Don't stop at this safe house. Now, if it's going the other way and they shake someone's hand, there's a handshake that they would know. And then they'd say, are you a friend of a friend? And they would tell them where they could go to find food, lodging, and a safe place just to sleep, if it's just for the next day. And on with their travels they go.
Okay, right now I would like to know more about this church, right? See, my question is, like, I can see the river from here, right? Why wouldn't they stay there, but would rather cross the river to come
to Canada?
Yeah, on this side.
It was called Upper Canada. And in 1833, there was a man by the name of William Wilberforce who had went to Parliament in Great Britain 18 times. Finally,
this was a black man?
this was a white man.
A white man, okay.
From Great Britain.
Okay.
And he asked that all people that were enslaved in the British colonies all over the world to be freed. 1833. It was enacted upon August 1st, 1834.
Oh, wow.
Which at Emancipation Day. That's why, and understand it's in Canada now. It's being recognized as Emancipation Day. Not that it's a holiday, but we know they always called the civic holiday, which was always in August, the first Monday in August, Civics Day, because they couldn't call it Emancipation Day, because that would be giving too much credit to people of color.
Yeah.
So we'll let it go for that at this point in time. But we also know this here. They left the United States because of remember, we are 30-some years ahead of them in allowing people to be so-called free. That's why they left the United States.
Too.
That's why they come across that border, fought here. A lot of the Africans fought here in Canada in the War of 1812, or otherwise we would have been a part of the United States. This part of Ontario would have been probably the Great Lakes. They would have it all right to this day.
Because you can see that, like, this part of
Ontario
is really part of the U.S.
And we are further south than Detroit is.
Exactly.
And people, they'll still look at you. And Leamington is another point. They're further south. But people will look at you and say, it's so cold in Canada. I say, how can you say that? You're from Detroit. You're north of Windsor.
Exactly.
Because they don't understand.
Yeah.
Americans don't care to understand. We are Canadian. And listen, I have my grandparent, my mother, she's American. And it's okay. I'm proud of that too. But I just know that those people left a place of hell, as far as I'm concerned, to see your baby snatched from you, not one, but 2 or 3 or 4, as many as they chose to take your children from you. That is so wicked.
And it's still happening now.
And it still happens now. And, you know, I always feel this church, like, we don't have a huge population here. And I don't know, like people say it's an oasis. It's always been where a person could come, get healed, get what they need, and go on. Go to the next port or the next place that needs healing. A lot of people came here, but they did not stay. They did not stay because of the Detroit River being so close that they could go and get their people, the enslaved people, and bring them back, because they always had a bounty on their head. And like I was saying, how they could come into the church and walk through the congregation, but people were hidden and they didn't know. They couldn't figure out where they were. And that's a good thing.
So that means if they couldn't find them, that means that there were already black people that were here that were free. That's what I said. Right. From 1818, when the people first, there were already free blacks here in Canada. So I always say, every Canadian, every black Canadian, and I'm not speaking of from Africa. I consider myself African Canadian. But as people say, all the black Canadians in this area, we all consider ourselves cousins. We call us cuz, C-U-Z, because there's the African, there's the influx of the African and the influx of the Caribbean. And they've come, and of course, once their children are born here, they become Canadian. But when we speak of original black Canadians, which there really isn't, but there were some here that were free. Were free, they were free before the 1833s. Yes.
Da Costa came here in the 1400s.
Oh, wow.
And he was a astrologist, because he could tell the water, he could tell the stars where things were. He had 5 languages. He could speak the native tongue. He could speak the African tongue, the Portuguese tongue, the French tongue, and the English. He had 5 languages he could speak.
Wow.
And people don't want to give him credit. If he was here, like any man, they had babies. Just like people in the plantations had babies that weren't the man they were with. The white man created babies. That's why you have people all different colors in one family. And what is it? What can you say? We're here. There's a reason why we're here. We're not going back. And I feel this here. And I never want to leave out the native people who helped us along the way. And I want people to know that the native, the Indian, held slaves as well. In the western part of the United States, they called them Black Indians, but what they were the native and the African that had babies together. And they helped us. They helped a lot of the people. They would tell you where to go, how to find food, what berries to eat, where to stay away from. You often wonder why the white plantation owners didn't have Indians, or as they were called, native or indigenous people. Why they did not enslave them. They couldn't hold them. When they wanted to run, they ran because they knew where to run. The African coming, there's a language difference. They'd never seen snow in their life. And all of a sudden, we're in this area, and they don't speak the language. The language difference had to be horrific. You're getting beaten. You don't know why you're getting beat. With a whip. With a whip. You're watching your brother hang from a tree because he wouldn't do as a master said, or the whatever he's called, that other man that made sure, the master made sure his words were done. It's just amazing. It's amazing. And when you think of things today, you just shake your head. At least I shake my head because I cannot believe. People say, oh, you don't know what you would have done. I don't know. But I hope to God that I would have had the courage to leave.